Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Cybersecurity Sensei, the Saturday morning cybersecurity mentorship program. And today, thank you to Douglas. We're going to get started with a topic that I was very, very interested to research and bring to you. And it's on IoT. Also known as the Internet of Things, IoT. And Douglas, do you want to share a little bit about that entrepreneur article that you found? Just a quick summary of what the article said.
Sure. Excuse us. Yeah, sure. So I found this article very interesting because I know we already had a meeting about that, and we talked through it. And then I saw it call my attention, and then you usually see these kind of things on cameras, smart TVs, stuff like that. But a thermometer, I would have never thought. So I started reading about it, and basically it's a very condensed article, very short article, but very, very, very. It's got some substance. I don't know if the person is an expert in IT, but he did a good job of covering the main points, I think, to the extent of his knowledge. And yeah, he mentioned about IoT, and he gave a very brief description, about what IoT means and some of the implications. And then he went on to relate this account about this casino that got hacked through a thermometer, a fish tank. And so I think it's a good reminder that we always have to keep our eyes open and thinking from the perspective of the bad guys, because this is just going to continue. This is just the beginning.
Okay, excellent. In short, for those that didn't read the article, someone claims, and there's no reason to doubt it, but someone claims that they got into a casino's fish tank thermometer and were able to, because it was on the network, they were able to infiltrate and what's called exfiltrate, in other words, remove the casino's what's called database of high rollers. In other words, the people that pay the most money when they come into their casino. In other words, personal information to the tune of, oh yeah, this guy spent $10 million in the casino last year, or something like that. So that's what was reportedly exfiltrated, removed from the network through the fish tank thermometer. So definitely something to spark your awareness and make you immediately hit the books and find out what is going on with it. So anyway, I really appreciate you giving us that article, Douglas. We're going to talk a little bit about all of the below, and because we only have an hour now, 50 minutes to get this done, I'm going to kind of go through it a little bit quickly, but I do invite discussion. Just please try and make sure that the discussion remains kind of short so we can stay on track here. But we're going to do an overview. Yes, Doug?
Just quick, he also mentioned something very interesting to all of us who are trying to get into this field. And he talked about the need of businesses to have specialists come in regularly on a monthly basis. And I think it's a very good point of discussion as well, to maybe just learn how to go in, because it might be a little very expensive to keep bringing experts or consultants from outside. Maybe you can go in and say, hey, I'll show you how to save money. You can hire me, or something like that.
Yeah. No, your point is well taken. Specialists in IoT are going to be increasingly in demand. Yep. Anyway, we're going to do an overview of IoT, talk about IoT devices, news we may have heard, what are some of the benefits and risks of IoT, and just some speculation here if an IoT device can be compromised, what does that mean to you and your organization and your data and your networks? I have some ideas for mitigation strategies, and then for everyone that's on this call, recommended study subjects, things that you can look at later on so you can get more smart on IoT. And then the point of it all is not to eliminate IoT. That is going to be relatively impossible to do, but manage to the inevitable change that comes as a result of IoT introduction into your network, intentional or otherwise. And then from PC Magazine, there's 4 IoT best practices that they came up with that I think are good for us to be thinking about. So first things first. This is a discussion of Internet of Things, and let's jump straight into it. And by the way, like it says at the bottom, if all you're doing is listening, you're missing out a little bit in this. So that's why, for example, Douglas has learned to just jump in and talk. And I appreciate that, and I'm sure Chris does as well. So start off. Name the IoT devices that you're aware of that you either have in your house or your car or on your person or whatever. Just name some of them. Go.
Okay. So what I can think of at home, and I'm sure it doesn't cover everything, I'm thinking the first thing that comes to mind is my smart TV and my cameras. I have a couple of Arlo cameras. But there might be other things as well. I mean, we don't have many things here at home, but that are, you know, we don't even make use of the TV on a daily basis. So we try to, you know, spend less time. So we don't have many devices. But one thing that I would have never imagined, for example, it's like a thermometer. We do not have a smart thermometer, but I think if it's anything, basically, even though I cannot think of anything else, but anything that is connected to your network could be compromised. No, so far I can only think about those 2 things. An our thermometer, but our thermometer is not connected, so it's not a smart thermometer.
Okay, Chris.
All I have is the TVs. We did have a Google. I don't want to say home. It's our competitor to Alexa. And I say we did because once my wife heard about it and realized that they follow words, she's just as paranoid as I am, going, yeah, I don't want that in my house. And I was told to disconnect it. She's the boss, so I had to disconnect it. But one thing I didn't think of, my diabetes monitor. And although it's Bluetooth, it causes my phone to be on Bluetooth more than I would like it to be. A very interesting vulnerability with keeping your phone on Bluetooth, by the way. So.
Right. Douglas, you mentioned one that I had not thought of, but I'm staring at it right now. I've got a wireless thermometer sitting right at my front door, and it gives me my temperature outside, and it's communicating wirelessly. So, you know, as everybody thinks about it, obviously we've got things like our phones. What about security cameras? You know, anything that has sensors in it and wireless communication. That's basically what IoT involves. They're talking about having so many things hooked up. If you're doing a home security system, if you're doing something where you dial in and turn your lights on and turn your thermostat, oh yeah, the Nest thermostat. When you turn your thermostat up because you're on your way home, and all of those things, they're wonderfully convenient, and they provide unprecedented levels of access and control, but that's also unprecedented levels of risk. So yeah, let's keep going. There's more. Any of the latest news you've heard about IoT besides the fish tank, which I thought was great? Anything? Any pressing news? Okay, that's fine. We'll move on.
I counted to 5 just to make sure Doug didn't want to say anything, but I know it's a growing industry, and a lot of the certification authorities are starting to look at that as a topics to learn real quickly. CompTIA has a few in their A+ series and a lot in their Network Plus series.
Very good. Yeah, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. I'm sorry?
No, I was going to say that what you were saying, Scotty, also reminded me the application that I have for the security system at home. We can dial it in. When we were in Europe, for example, we were constantly checking to see if it was connected and it was locked and all that. And yeah, so that's definitely something that most of us have. Someone who owns a home usually has one of those systems.
Okay. So in its basest form, what IoT is describing is any electronic device that has some sort of processor in it, but it involves sensors and wireless technology. Oh, here's another good one we hadn't even thought about. We didn't get out into our carport. How is it that you can be driving along and all of a sudden on your dashboard it pops up and says your tire pressure is low in your right front tire? There is a sensor, a wireless sensor, that's sitting in your valve stem that's communicating with your vehicle or other vehicles, or somebody who walks past and can see it. It's communicating. It's basically saying, here is the tire pressure in this area. It's a sensor and it's wirelessly communicating. So just something to think about. All right, so those are the two emerging technologies. Now, this is just to give you an idea, the benefits of the IoT devices. Let's start with that little photo up in the upper right-hand corner. That is, that is the smallest Bluetooth chip available right now. Now let's think, what's involved in Bluetooth? We've got, wireless technology, we've got encryption technology, we've got the ability to establish sessions in a manner similar to TCP/IP. It has the ability to send and receive, all on that little tiny chip. To give you an idea, where could that chip go? How many of you have pets? And what's the big thing they're doing now with pets? They're chipping them. They're installing little chips like this in your pet, so you can go scan it and it'll say, okay, this cat's 4 years old and this is his vet and these are his medical conditions, whole 9 yards. This is his immunization schedule, everything from that little tiny chip. So the issue is that these things are really inexpensive. That's another thing that's driving the industry. They're putting chips in everything because they're so inexpensive. Broadly available both within the industry, such as the government, and the public, such as your FitBit on your hand. It is standards-based, and what I mean by that, it's typically based on what's called a Linux kernel, an operating system on the chip. And the reason I say Linux is open source, which means it's free. So the operating system is typically a Linux kernel. It has very low power drains, so you can have it there for a long period of time. In the case of your wireless sensors on your car, those little tiny sensors will last over a year transmitting data. Just a little tiny chip on your tire. Operates wirelessly. And what I say here, it's interoperable and autonomous. What that means is it doesn't have to have somebody controlling it. Once you set it, it just keeps going. I don't have to, for example, get on my flip phone and say, communicate with my Wi-Fi network every time I open it up. It does that automatically. So that's what I say about set and forget. In other words, remember that, and we're going to get to this when we get into the risks and stuff, remember there could be IoT devices from long ago that you tried out and decided to implement, let's say at your work, and said, nah, this is not such a good deal, and then you just sort of set it on your desk and left it there, and it's still on your network. Okay, so remember that. When I say about set and forget, the important thing is the forget part. You could forget you even have it. One of the advantages is you can put them in hazardous environments like a mine or a reactor, and without putting your employees in any sort of dangerous situation. And also where direct viewing is not possible, such as swallowable technologies. I think you guys have heard about those. Swallowable cameras, where they just run a sensor, okay, it should be about here, and they put the sensor on you and say, okay, what am I seeing? And look at that, your insides are projected up on a television screen. So the benefits of IoT devices are incredibly good. However, and let's go to the next one, the risks of the IoT devices. By the way, that photo that you see up in the upper right-hand corner is advertised, not sure that that's the case, but it's advertised as being the smallest full IoT device. That means it's got the processor, that means it's got the communications, that means it's got the encryption, that means it's got the command and control, that means it's got the ability to save settings, that means it's got sensors, etc. All on a chip smaller than a dime. Pretty frightening. So here's some of the risks that I was able to put together. Yes, Doug?
Sorry, I don't want to deviate from this, but it's a question that comes to mind is, I don't believe in, I forgot the name, these theories out there that are wild theories, conspiracy theories. I stay away from that. But hearing about something that lately has come to, it's everywhere. A lot of people are claiming that vaccines may contain some sort of chip that will try to keep control, blah, blah, blah. Do you think it's possible at such a industrial level to put something like that in your body through a vaccine or through any other IV means? Is there a danger, or maybe?
Well, I think we all remember way back the what was it called, the some internal voyage or something, the movie about the people who ended up getting injected into this guy's bloodstream and ended up in his heart and his lungs and all those sorts of things, and came out through his ear or his nose or whatever it was, in a little submarine. The point, and that was taken to the absolutely fantastic level. But with device miniaturization, you have the capability and the possibility of having things like injectables. The challenge you run into is that anything that's in the body, and I'm using that as the example, anything that's in the body is subject to being examined by the body and rejected by the body because it is a foreign object. The body has built-in stuff that looks for those things and actually, builds up whatever it's called, antibodies or
an immune response?
Histamines. So that's why when someone, for example, gets a new heart or a new shoulder joint or a new hip or whatever, something foreign that they put into the body, the doctors have to consider adding what are called anti-rejection drugs. So, in order to stop the body from even looking at this particular device or whatever. So, theoretically, yes, but in practice, it becomes extremely hard, especially if you're talking about injecting it in, 3-4 billion people. It becomes far beyond reasonable to think that it's being done. Far beyond reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
All right. Yeah, thanks, Scott.
Sure. So anyway, standards-based. The reason I say standards-based is, remember I talked about that little Linux kernel on a chip. Well, if it's Linux, people who know about Linux know more than you do, most likely, and therefore they know more about that chip than you do. That's just something to think about. If it's based on a standard, people study the standards. Multiple wireless paths. Wanted to get to that one. Let's use this as an example. Can you tell me how many different ways this thing communicates? Go.
Well, one is wirelessly.
Okay. How many different ways, what different methods does it use to wirelessly communicate? Number one, obviously, the cellular phone system, right? What else?
I have mine set to let me know when there are other wireless broadband connections available out there in case I need it.
Okay, when you say wireless, get more specific. I know where you're going, but what do you mean by wireless?
I'm talking about broadband connections or network systems. Like if you're in an airport or in a restaurant, well, restaurants don't offer
what
that.
protocol? What protocol?
Oh, that I don't.
Because they're different frequencies, they use different communication methods. Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi, okay. That's
okay, well, remember, there's cellular, then there's Wi-Fi, and they're different.
And there's also Bluetooth.
Yep. And so there's others. Keep going. Chris mentioned it. And in fact, here, let's go back to the photo that I put here on the screen. Remember? That little chip? Bluetooth.
It's Bluetooth, yep.
Oh,
Bluetooth.
It connects, yeah, Bluetooth, yeah.
Okay, so we've gotten to 3 so far. One is cellular networks, one is Wi-Fi, and one is Bluetooth. All from this phone. There's more. Keep going. There's at least one more. And I'll give you a hint. Have you ever done this or seen this? Remember that?
Near field communication.
There you go.
What is it?
Near field communication.
Infield.
It basically says, I've got a contact I want to give you. Okay, I'm ready for it. okay, I've got it. That did not go to the cellular network. That was not Bluetooth communication. That was not, Wi-Fi. That was this device shouting to this device, and this device saying, I've received it. Near field communications. Thank you, Chris. So you're walking around with this thing stuck in your pocket, and it has at least 4 different wireless communications, and in many, many cases, they're all turned on. They are all enabled. So just something to think about. When we say multiple wireless paths, you can't just protect for one. You have to consider all possible capabilities. Because, here's where you get into the big discussion. Convenience versus security. And there is always a tug of war. There's always friction between those two. Somebody says, oh yeah, well I've got this brand new, heart monitor. I looked at my dad's pacemaker. My dad has passed away, and we're down here in the house, and he used to have this big monstrous handheld device that he would hold up against his pacemaker, and it would monitor, and then he'd send it off to his lab or whatever, and they'd say, yep, your EKG looks good. But that big monster sensor is being replaced by an IoT device or a near field sensor that can do it all directly through your phone app. You hold your phone up there, So you're walking around with something that is incredibly helpful, but it's also incredibly risky. Why? Because you don't know what people have or have turned on when they walk into your environment. You don't know what they've done or how they've set it. Oops. I just turned my phone camera on. There's another example. You saw me turn my device like this. Well, if you do that fast enough, Motorola has a little setting in there called Motorola Moves, and it turns your camera on just by twisting your phone. Here's another one. Let's see if I can get it to do it. Turns your light on. So stuff may go on even when you don't know it. You, the carrier, don't know it, let alone the person who's running the environment. So that's the problem. Every device can be independently operated and managed and controlled and set. And also, I say they're difficult to patch. Remember I said everything's is, and I'm generalizing here, but it's typically what's called Linux on a chip, a kernel chip. And that chip, what if there's a zero-day vulnerability? Remember we talked about zero-day. What's the most important thing to remember about a zero-day vulnerability? Remember that? Guys?
Nobody has found it yet.
But it is already there.
It's already in the wild, yes.
Okay, so your magical chip, and I'm gonna keep using this one because it's turned off, but your magical chip in here that's doing whatever, communicating to your heart monitor or whatever, may have vulnerabilities in it that just have not been discovered yet. A zero-day means, oops, this is already out there, but it's got a vulnerability. So you run into the need, how do you patch your wireless security cameras? How do you patch your phone? How do you patch your doorbell monitor camera, etc.? So, like it says here, sometimes they can be difficult to patch. And then, of course, Inconspicuous, and this is the one I was telling you about. You tested something out and said, oh, hey, let's do this. No, not such a good idea. So you set it off on a shelf somewhere, and it stays there, but it's still running. And you have forgotten entirely about it. But it's still there, and it's still running. So they can be very inconspicuous. That's what I mean by it. You can forget you even have it there. So from a security infrastructure assurance or information assurance perspective, let's talk about these. If these devices can be compromised, they can increase your complexity in your enclave. Who's responsible to patch your, I don't know, your lighting system? Who's responsible to patch your, like Chris was saying earlier, your CEO's FitBit? Because what if it needs to be patched and he's walking around wearing it in your environment? So your complexity has just increased because it's not a server, it's not a workstation, it's not a network item, it's not a phone item. So do you have to come up with an IoT group to monitor, manage, and upgrade your devices? Or do you make the server people responsible for IoT, or the network device people, or the workstation device people, or the phone people responsible for IoT? And how is a phone person going to react when you say, "Oh yeah, well you've got to upgrade our doorbell cameras"? That's not a phone, you know? And oh, by the way, to get back to this guy has at least 4 different methods of wirelessly communicating, so you can't even say, well, if it uses cellular, we'll call it a telephone device. Okay, but it also uses Wi-Fi. So is it a network device? See what I'm saying? Who manages these? You're getting into highly complex multiple paths, so you can't even say, generally speaking, if it grabs an IP address, it should be considered a network device. That means that phones are now network devices because they have they've got MAC addresses built into their chips. For example, your phones are now network devices by that definition. See what I'm saying?
So it can also serve as a hotspot.
As a, oh yeah, we've seen that, and we'll get into that when we talk about best practices. That's a very good one, Douglas. But they can be used to divulge sensitive information. What I mean by that, and if you look at the next one, illegal surveillance, what if somebody cracks into your house's nanny camera and starts publishing photos of your daughter running around in her underwear on the internet? Yeah, people are that sick. But sensitive information could also be, if you've got a camera and I'm looking at my banking information, could be transmitted if somebody can compromise that device. See what I'm saying? The other thing, I say it can be weaponized, and this has actually occurred. There have been numerous what are called DDoS attacks. We only have 20 minutes left, so I'll make this fast, but a DDoS is short for Distributed Denial of Service. And it basically says that if, let's say, and again, I'm using these two as an example because these two operate literally as 2 little computers. If I'm trying to get to your device and for some strange reason you don't want me there, you want to, your paying customers need to get to this device. Well then, if I want to be mean, I figure out a way to where I can use up all the sessions on this device or all the bandwidth on this device by, it's called a flood of data going to this to where there's not room for other devices to connect. That's called a denial of service. But a distributed denial of service is where, let's say, me and, I don't know, 1 million of my friends all start hitting your device simultaneously. And it's not just, I'll use the TCP/IP discussion. When something sends a packet to another device, it's usually frequently referred to as a SYN packet, S-Y-N, synchronized packet. Then this one sends an ACK back, which is acknowledgement that I've received your SYN. Well, you have to have your devices listening for both, the SYN and the ACK. But here's the thing. What if I didn't receive exactly what you sent me? Then there's the requirement for me to send what's called a SYN NACK, not acknowledging. Okay? So what a distributed denial of service attack, I've heard of this occurring. They get all of these devices that have been compromised to send NACK packets back to this as if this had actually sent out a SYN to them, but that's not the case. They redirect these NACK packets back over to this guy because all they're interested in doing is consuming the bandwidth, the receive bandwidth on this, so that normal requested mandatory critical data doesn't reach this device. Okay, that's called a distributed denial of service. And if somebody can compromise one Nest camera, they can compromise 1 million Nest cameras, or heart monitors, or thermometer sensors, or old flip phones, or whatever. You know, whatever. And because they're being sold wildly out there in the industry. Oh, I told you about the Philips Hue device that I had and how I, had it on our network and I took it off because of the vulnerabilities. Well, there are lots of people that are using Philips Hues. If it has a vulnerability, that means it can be compromised. If it can be compromised, it could be weaponized to be used against some server in West Germany or Atlanta, and you don't even know about it. You're sitting there going, man, my phone's really slow. Well, yeah, because it's involved in an attack in Madrid that you didn't even know about. Okay? Next one. It can be rendered unstable, unreliable, or even deadly. What if a heart monitor device that's designed to alert when your heart develops arrhythmias, in other words, it's not operating the way it should, they put in this nice wireless device that says, call a doctor. And those are out there. But instead, somebody turns around and says, no, I have played around with this, and just for fun, I'm going to have it call Domino's Pizza instead. Your subject could perish or be subject to permanent physical damage because their device is not operating the way it's intended to. Because somebody got into it. They compromised it and reprogrammed it to not do what it's supposed to do, or to do it differently, or to report and say, this guy's having a heart attack and he's just fine. That's the challenge of IoT. You want it to be flexible, but you also want it to be secure, to where other people can't make it flexible. So it's a real challenge. And the last one, and I'm using the example of, your IoT device that you tested and you thought, no, we're not going to do that, and you leave it on your shelf. It could be very difficult to detect or disable once you put it there. You forget about it. my thermometer sensor. Now, I do know that my thermometer sensor communicates directly with the thermometer device. It doesn't go to the internet or whatever, but the same sort of thing could exist using Wi-Fi technology. If so, they're both talking to your Wi-Fi router. Any questions? Any discussions? Okay. Here are some mitigation strategies that I put together. Mitigation means to make it less. In other words, if you can get it to, instead of harming 1,000 devices, you can get it down to where it harms 2 devices. That's a mitigation strategy. May not eliminate it, but it cuts down on its effect. All right? The first thing we have to assume, a lot of people are saying, oh, well, we just won't allow it. Here's the thing. And I use what's called a SCIF mentality. Have you guys heard of a SCIF before? Chris, I think you have. A SCIF is a secured, it stands for Secured Compartmentalized Information Facility, I think is what it is. And it basically means that it's a room that's literally a safe. And before you walk into that room, you have to do things like take all of your phones and your electronic devices out of your pockets, turn them off, put them into a safe deposit box, take the key with you, and then go through some sort of scanner that says, yes, he has no electronic devices. Okay? SCIF mentality basically says no electronic devices are allowed in here, period. Well, you can't have, you will not be successful telling your CEO that his heart monitor device can't be in his office. You will not be successful with that fight. So let's assume that you can't tell everyone their personal devices are not allowed. So some of the mitigation strategies that I came up with were what it's called certificate-based authentication. In other words, you issue and install what are called, I'm going to turn it around this way, what are called certificates. And that certificate is issued specifically to allow this device to get to this network. And this network will not accept any connections that do not carry a valid certificate. It's called certificate-based authentication or sessions. You could have certificate-based sessions. And it is possible, although it's extremely complex, to have devices that refuse to communicate with each other unless they use the same certificates. It is possible. All right? So certificate-based, and by the way, you manage those certificates. And somebody can't copy a certificate onto another device because the certificates are serialized for each device. Very complex, but very possible. I'll give an example. In our headquarters building, somebody opens up a home phone and it looks for Wi-Fi. The network recognizes that this does not have a certificate, so it directs them to the guest network. If somebody opens a government-owned phone, same phone, literally it could be the identical devices, but if it's government-owned, it has been configured with a certificate, and that certificate identifies itself, and then it connects to the government network. So you've got your guest network, you've got your government network, all controlled by whether or not the device has a certificate. Okay? Zero trust. Zero trust. What does zero trust mean? It's kind of self-explanatory. But zero trust basically means nothing is allowed unless you specifically turn it on.
And you give it permission with lots of security controls.
Right. Right. In other words, you don't, I'll give an example. I just this week bought a brand new wireless router for my house. Zero trust means I should have started it with 0 connections possible and then turned each one on in a managed fashion, looking at all of the credentials and sessions and capabilities, and said, yes, that's okay, yes, that's okay, yes, that's okay. Zero Trust takes a lot of knowledge. And Zero Trust for, let's say, industry standard devices like my $79 wireless router that I bought can be really daunting. I mean, if it takes me 2 hours at, I don't know, $100 an hour to set up a $79 device, at what point is the benefit outweighed by the cost? You have to think about those things. So, next one. Enclave IDS and IPS. In other words, you be looking for intrusions. And there are what are called IPS, intrusion prevention systems. When they notice something like this, they have the ability to, for example, shut down sessions. Oh, I didn't even put it in here, but jamming. We've had sessions where, they go in and it's a sensitive session and they're doing it in their auditorium or something, which is very difficult. People walk in the door with these in their pockets and whatever. And what they do is they turn on a jammer, a session jammer, that wirelessly says nothing communicates with anything in this room. And it overrides, basically obscures one device's ability to connect with another device. Jammers. Now those are extremely disruptive. So you got to be really careful, but it is a possible strategy. If you need to, this technology exists to jam. Rogue and anomaly detection. This is something that DoD put together many years ago, to where they have set up devices that are on the network to literally look at all of the nearby devices that are in their particular subnets and say, this one's acting weird, and literally to report that up to a central server. So it's called rogue detection. It may not be able to do anything, but it could say, teacher, Tommy's chewing gum or whatever, and your network can then take action or evaluate based on what your rogue detection found. Geo-tracking and blocking. Many people don't realize this, but various geographic areas, including countries in this world, have their own dedicated IP addresses, IP address ranges. So if you're looking for, gosh, I don't know, 62 dot whatever, that could be South Africa, for example. So there is what's called geo-tracking, which says if an IP address range comes from this set of IP addresses, it's a good guess it's originating from this area of the world. And you can turn on geo-blocking. The best example I can give is when our new Secretary of Labor arrived, he wanted to go to a nearby squash court and make arrangements for squash appointments, because that's what he liked doing when he exercised. And he couldn't reach the website for the Washington, D.C. Squash Club. And he said, fix it. He turned to the network guys and made it an IT issue. Come to find out, the server that was, whatever, WashingtonSquashClub.com or something, was literally on a server in Russia. And our government entity had geo-blocked all Russian IP addresses. So the secretary was like, how do we fix this? Well, pick up the phone and call them. You know, another opportunity here is called war walking. Have you guys heard of war dialing or war walking?
Yes.
Douglas?
I think you explained it once. That was portrayed in the movie also, War Games.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
that's where it started. That's where the term came from.
And that's it's like a tracking mechanism that utilizes some sort of protocol to see if somebody's connected from not connected to the network, but if another network is being used as a hotspot within the premises or something like that.
That's exactly right. Remember we said it's standards-based, so what you do is you have a sensor of some sort that you can literally walk down a hallway and say, how many wireless access points are in this hallway? You know, offices that are here in this hallway. And you can get them, you can see the names, and in many cases it's like, oh yeah, room 4, HP printer, or whatever, you know, Bobby Sue's hotspot, you know, Tommy's phone, whatever. And it can literally, by war walking, you can identify these unauthorized connection capabilities and then address them from a management standpoint. You know, talk to knock on the door and say, excuse me, can I speak to the manager? And say, you know, we show something that says Tommy Joe's phone in here and it's not authorized. Do you have somebody here named Tommy Joe? Why, yes, we do. Would you please ask them to turn their phone off or disable that capability? And they do that. And in fact, where we're at, I think they're required to do it every 6 months. War walk the entire building, just to give you an idea. And then the last mitigation strategy that I came up with was you need to establish and publish standards. For example, no device can connect unless it's able to be patched. For example, I'm just giving that as a possibility. So let's go through this. I've got like 2 more slides. Sorry, go ahead.
Going back to the geo-blocking sandboxing, what if a network masks their IP addresses? Are you still able to block them? Find out where they're really coming from and block them?
Yeah, blocking is the challenge, though. What you do is you say they cannot connect unless certain criteria is met. And Cisco, I'll use that as an example. Cisco has what's called ICE, I-S-E. And you can configure ICE to where unless the device has the right certificates and is at the right patch level, it won't allow connection. And you can do a sandbox where you can set it off to somewhere else and say, sit there until you're patched, and literally push the patch to it, make sure it's patched. When it comes back and says, yep, I'm patched now, put it back on the network.
Okay.
Just by rerouting the IP connection and sessions. Cisco ICE does that, and I'm sure there are hundreds of others, but Cisco does it very well. And they've been doing that for, gosh, I don't know, 10, 15 years. Okay?
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So what can you learn to get smart on IoT? Obviously, because these all involve communication technologies, learn your Network Plus. That will help a whole bunch. Or, if you want to go farther, Cisco. Certification exams and stuff. Learn about ports and protocols. I know it's boring as all get out, but it's really helpful down the road to understand that port 53 is what?
DNS.
No. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Port 53 is DNS. Is it DNS or UDP?
DNS.
Okay. So, port 53 Port 25, SMTP. Port 443, HTTPS. You get to the point where you're learning these things. And therefore, when you encounter them, you go, hey, that's not supposed to be there. For example, you learn about host and session authentication, how these guys learn to speak to each other. Host and session authentication. Certificates, both for authentication and for encryption and decryption. You can use certificates for both of those. Linux is the operating system of choice because it's free, and like you saw in that the little tiny chip, it can be embedded in nearly everything, including your cat. So learn about rogue detection, intrusion prevention, geo-blocking, sandboxing, and I guess in general, to learn about the standards, like Chris was saying, if you just buy a phone and you don't recognize that it has what's called the near field sensors turned on, then you are now susceptible to somebody bumping up against you and possibly snagging your address book or your banking material or whatever. So you learn the standards so you know what to protect against. You know what the capabilities are, so you can take that into account when you're designing your protection strategies. And like I said, because everything is always evolving and emerging, never stop learning. Never stop learning. So, second to the last slide. It's a certainty that IoT and complexity are going to continue to increase. It's unavoidable. IoT and BYOD, we didn't talk about that, but it's called bring your own device. Bring your own device. It is possible, for example, to set up a government certificate on a non-government phone, for example. It is possible. It's called bring your own device, and it is being enabled in a number of different industries successfully and securely. But you got to manage it right. Incorporate yourself into the planning process. In other words, you don't want to have somebody buy a new $100,000 whatever sensor and then discover that it has vulnerabilities and can't be patched. You need to be involved early on, do your full security reviews, provide your recommendations. Hey, instead of buying this, why don't we buy this because it's got better security? It does the same thing, but it's more secure. You need to be involved in the requirements planning process. Okay? Defense in depth. Have your mitigating strategies implemented at all levels. Sessions, enclaves, devices, all of those, they should all work together so that no one intrusion becomes ultimately successful. Defense in depth. Monitor everything, only allow what has been evaluated and approved. That's zero trust. And be ready to address changes that are going to occur. So here are 4 best practices, and our time's over, so I'm going to speed through this. You can go look at it afterwards. Devices that can't have their software updated should never be implemented. Number 1. Change the default username and password on any device in your network. For example, these have default usernames and passwords. Passwords for IoT devices should be unique for every device, especially when they're connected to the internet. And always patch IoT devices with the latest software and firmware. So you have to establish patching and upgrade schedules. Anything else, guys?
So it is wise to say program devices to scan for firmware or for updates, like on a daily basis, the way it is right now.
Right. You have to go to the manufacturer's site.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, I'm out of time, so that's all I got for today, guys. I gotta